But basically, in an experiment, a researcher is going to manipulate a variable to see its effect on another variable. And just like we talked about doing things randomly, like pulling people in from the population and random assignment to groups, is really important to control for other relevant factors. So when I'm conducting an experiment, if I have 20 people participating, I need to assign them randomly either to the control group or to the experimental group, because this helps me account for the fact that people might be different ages, people might have different intelligence levels, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic status. And I can't account for that, right? I can't find 20 identical people. And so to kind of balance that out, if I'm randomly assigning them to the groups that they're in, I can at least hope to mitigate some of those differences based just on the randomness of how they're assigned. Some of the key terms here are the control group. And so these are just kind of basic vocab, but understanding that the control group is the group that doesn't get the manipulation. We measure against them. The independent variable is the thing that I'm changing. And I have a whole experiment on the next slide that I'll talk about so we can actually like apply these terms. The dependent variable is the factor that I measure then in response to the independent variable. And then a big thing that you have to worry about with an experiment, is there any confounding variables that might affect my results? Maybe I'm doing a study outside and one of the days with the control group, the weather was really nice, and the other day it was raining. That would be a confounding variable. It's something I didn't account for in the experiment, but could throw off the results because it was different for the different groups. So we always want to make sure we do the best we can to like not have any sort of confounding variable in an experiment. Leading producer of specialty chocolate wants to increase their sales. They set up a test program in local malls. Identical chocolate is sold at 2 stores. In one mall, the smell of chocolate is circulated throughout the vents. In the other, normal air is circulated. They recorded sales at each store over a period of 6 months. So if people want to just in the chat take a chance at what is the control group, what is the independent variable, and what is the dependent variable. So for control group, people in the area where the air is normal, because nothing's happening to them. They're just going about their everyday normal business at the mall. And so that's the normal air group, is the control group. They have not been manipulated in any way. The independent variable, the air circulated. So that's what's changing. In one mall, the air is regular. In the other mall, it's like the chocolate scented air. So that is what is being manipulated or changed. And that's what we're measuring the result of. So the result of the chocolate scented air is the dependent variable, which is the sales of the store. And so we're then measuring, does the chocolate air have an effect? And so the dependent variable is the stores and their sales. Good. So those are kind of the 3 parts there. So if you want to, in the poll down there, find where it says question 1. And question 1 asks you, which correlation coefficient best represents a moderate relationship showing less anxiety symptoms in people with higher life satisfaction? So there's a couple keywords in that question that are going to give you hints to the answers. All right, so the correct answer here is A, and let's talk about why. So there's a few keywords, and so on the AP test, what's really going to be good for you to get used to is how you read the questions. I always first cross off like irrelevant information, and then I always underline the keywords. And so one of the keywords here is moderate relationship. And so if you know that the numbers only can go from like 0 to 1, moderate kind of means middle. So we're looking for a kind of middle number here. So I think that automatically eliminates E as our choice, because that's not in the middle. That's like as far as you can go. And it probably eliminates B and D as well, because those are kind of towards the ends. So that leaves us with A and C as our choices. And how do I get there? 1 is minus and 1 is plus. And so we have to look at what the rest of the question says. Fewer anxiety symptoms. So that number is going down. Less anxiety, number going down. And people who report higher life satisfaction. So that number is going up. So we have one number going down and one number going up, which means that's a negative correlation or an inverse relationship. And so A then is the answer that we can kind of process of elimination get to, because that's the one that has the negative in front of it. So the second question is talking about designing a study. Magali and Jean-Gabriel have been asked to design a study investigating happiness across the lifespan. They decide their study will involve going to the mall and asking people of a variety of ages if they are happy or unhappy. What is the most serious flaw of this design? The correct answer is D, which is what most of us are putting. And so these kind of questions I dislike because they are tricky, because it says most serious flaw. About like what the focus of psychology and what we're talking about in like designing a study or an experiment. And so the answer is D, because we haven't operationally defined happiness. And so operational definitions are just basically really thorough ways that we describe what we're measuring, because happiness is like this vague term, right? Happiness to me might mean something really different to you. So if I don't have a scale or a specific way to like measure happiness, just asking people if they're happy or unhappy really won't give me very valid results. I could see that some people put answer B, survey data is not as valid as experimental data. That's kind of true, because we talked about people could lie on a survey, but we still use surveys and we rely on them if we take a big enough sample size. So that's where it gets tricky, where it's the most serious flaw. Like thinking about which of these things would cause us the biggest problem in our experiment or in our study would be the one that not having a solid definition of what happiness is. And it's okay that people, some people put A, it's okay that people know that they're part of a study, and actually we would say that you typically have to get informed consent and people have to agree. You can't just like experiment or study someone without their permission usually. So that's always good to keep in mind. Third multiple choice question, I've got 5 total, so that get to it. Sandra strongly believes that attending daycare is detrimental to children's development, so she decides to write her psychology term paper on this topic. She does a literature search and finds several articles supporting her opinion, but she finds the majority indicates that children attending daycare experience healthy development. She writes her paper using the sources that find negative associations with daycare and attendance. This is an example of this one. The answer for this one is A, it's confirmation bias. It's basically like, as a human, I like things that agree with me, right? And I don't like things that disagree with me. And so sometimes I'm biased in the information that I choose because I like the things that agree with me more. And like we talked about previously, that's where we have to make sure we have a really good scientific attitude in psychology, and that we're not being biased in the results and the things that we're looking at. And that's also why when you're looking at data and studies, because if you would have read Sandra's paper right here, you would have been like, oh, geez, that does seem like daycare has a negative effect. But if you don't actually like think about, well, what are Sandra's sources and is she representing both sides of the issue? If you don't critically think about that, you could fall for her confirmation bias and then be completely misinformed about that information. So again, one of the big things here is having a scientific attitude, considering where your information is coming from, and critically thinking about that information. Good, that was a good question. Question 4, what is a limitation that affects the generalizability of research results? So the correct answer for this one would be sample size, C, and let's talk about that. So we talked about generalizing, in a case study, we're studying one person individually, and so it's difficult to make like a generalization of the, to the rest of the population. And so with sample size, if our sample size is small, that can actually limit how much we can actually talk about whether our research is valid for the rest of the population. If I'm studying all 16-year-olds in the United States, but in my sample, I only sample 10 kids, that's really going to limit how much I can actually generalize my results, because that's not going to actually give me a really accurate picture and accurate idea of what all teenagers in the United States are like. If I did a bigger sample size and I was able to like survey 100,000 teenagers, then I might be able to generalize my research results more. But the sample size, if it's small, makes it really difficult to generalize, because it's not usually then representative of the whole population. All right, question 5. This is the last question. This one's a little long. An upper-level psychology class is conducting an experiment on racial prejudice that involves having participants rate the likability of faces in a set of photos. However, they tell the participants that the study is about the effects of aging on likability. When participants are finished, they are thanked for their time and leave the experiment. In this example, the class forgot to blank in order to resolve the blank. So this is about the ethics of psychology and research. So think about what ethically you would have to do to research or have people participate. The answer here is B. You always have to debrief. If people are participating in a study, one of the things is that we have to inform them of what's happening and talk about it afterwards. And then to get rid of like the deception involved so that they can kind of leave. Other ethical concerns would be like people have to agree to participate in a study. You can't hurt people. That seems kind of obvious. But yeah, so there are ethical guidelines that researchers have to abide by, even in psychology or any really field of science. Deception is like lying to them. So basically like Ronak asked a question about deception, and basically, yeah, it's like you can lie to people when you're doing an experiment as long as after the experiment's over, you tell them what the lie was. They can't go on like continuing to believe that like lie forever. So the deception part is okay as long as it's debriefed afterwards.